Pour a spoonful of maple syrup over pancakes today, and it feels like a luxury from the North Woods. Sweet, regional, expensive. But 2 centuries ago, Americans were trying to make something much bigger from maple trees. Ordinary sugar. In 1790, Thomas Jefferson wrote that enormous parts of the United States were covered with sugar maples. He believed their sugar could rival cane. And then he said something that makes the forgotten contest impossible to ignore. What a blessing it would be, he argued, to replace a sugar tied to black slavery with one made from American trees. For a moment, maple sugar was not a souvenir. It was an alternative future. That future did not win. By 1850, the United States was producing roughly 34 million pounds of maple sugar, but nearly 248 million pounds of cane sugar. So what happened? The easy answer is that cane simply made better sugar. It did not. The deeper answer is that maple and cane belong to 2 completely different economic systems. One was scattered through northern forests and made seasonally by households. The other could concentrate land, mills, capital, trade, and coerced labor into a plantation machine. Maple lost the market. Plantation cane won the system. Long before Jefferson praised the sugar maple, indigenous peoples of northeastern North America had already developed traditions for collecting maple sap and concentrating it into food. European settlers did not invent maple sugaring. They learned the basic practice here. And the product they valued was not always the amber syrup we picture today. Syrup is mostly water compared with solid sugar. Keep boiling concentrated sap, and eventually the sugar can be crystallized, stirred, molded, and stored. Before modern containers made liquid syrup easy to package and move, solid maple sugar had obvious advantages. A molded cake could be wrapped. It could be traded, it could be grated or broken apart. It could sit in storage and sweeten food long after the sap stopped running. That matters because maple season is short. The useful flow comes during a narrow late winter and early spring window when freezing nights and warmer days move sap through the tree. The sap itself is weak. At around 2% sugar, it can take more than 40 gallons of sap to make a gallon of syrup. Solid sugar requires even more evaporation. So maple sugar was never effortless. People had to tap trees, collect heavy sap, cut fuel, keep fires going, skim and boil, and judge the concentration correctly. But much of that work arrived during a season when ordinary farm work was relatively quiet. This made maple fit a household economy remarkably well. A farm family did not need a tropical estate. It did not need a giant crushing mill. It did not need a transatlantic supply chain. It needed maple trees, vessels, fuel, time, and knowledge. And there is another detail modern viewers can easily miss. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, the useful maple product was often the solid sugar, not the pouring syrup. The familiar glass bottle would come much later as storage and transportation improved. So when early Americans talked about maple, they were not proposing a fancy topping for breakfast. They were discussing a domestic source of one of the most valuable food commodities in the Atlantic economy. That is why the first great American argument for maple sugar was about something larger than flavor. It was about independence. In the early republic, cane sugar carried baggage. Much of the sugar Americans consumed came through Atlantic trade networks connected to Caribbean plantations. Those plantations were among the most brutal labor systems in the Atlantic world, built around enslaved people growing and processing cane under punishing conditions. To abolitionists, every spoonful of cane sugar raised a moral question. Benjamin Rush, physician, reformer, and abolitionist, saw maple as part of the answer. In 1791, he published an account of the sugar maple and argued that Americans could produce sugar without supporting plantation slavery. Jefferson joined the enthusiasm. That part of the story deserves care. Jefferson criticized the slavery behind Caribbean sugar while remaining a slaveholder himself. His maple advocacy does not erase that contradiction, but his letters show how seriously some Americans took the possibility. He bought maple sugar. He tried to plant sugar maples at Monticello. He imagined family sugar orchards. He even believed the United States might eventually supply its own demand and export the surplus. This was more than patriotic gardening. Maple sugar briefly became a political product, local instead of imported, northern instead of tropical, and for some buyers, morally preferable to plantation cane. And it was not merely theoretical. An 1810 federal manufacturing report recorded more than 3 million pounds of maple sugar in Ohio alone, although the report itself warned that the number might be questionable. Even with that caution, the larger point is clear. People were making serious quantities of sugar from trees, and entrepreneurs tried to push it beyond household production. In upstate New York and Pennsylvania, investors backed schemes to turn forests into commercial maple sugar districts. The Holland Land Company even saw large-scale maple production as one possible use for its enormous western New York holdings. The dream ran into stubborn realities. Yields changed with the weather. Finished sugar had to leave rough country over difficult roads. Harvesting sap from thousands of scattered trees was hard to centralize. Some early commercial ventures disappointed their investors, and as settlement expanded, maple forests themselves were often cleared to make room for farms. Maple did not fail because the sugar tasted bad. It struggled because a forest product was difficult to convert into a standardized national supply chain. So why did maple not become America's everyday sweetener? Because while maple advocates were imagining a nation of sugar orchards, another sugar system was learning how to scale. The turning point came near New Orleans. In the 1790s, Louisiana planters had cane, warm weather, and ambition. What they did not yet have was a reliable local method for turning cane juice into granulated sugar at a profitable scale. Then came Antoine Morin, Saint-Domingue. Morin was a skilled sugar maker and refugee from Saint-Domingue, the Caribbean colony being torn apart by revolution. Etienne de Boré employed him to help build and operate sugar works on a plantation near New Orleans. In 1795, the experiment succeeded. The cane juice granulated. It sounds like a small technical victory. It was not. Granulation meant Louisiana cane could become a stable, transportable commodity. A planter could grow cane, crush it, boil the juice, crystallize the sugar, pack it, ship it, borrow against it, and expand. The Louisiana sugar boom had begun. Morin is important because his presence exposes another hidden layer of the story. Knowledge moved through the same Atlantic world as crops, capital, refugees, and slavery. Saint-Domingue had been one of the great centers of the Atlantic sugar economy. Revolution displaced people with deep experience in tropical sugar production. Some of that expertise reached Louisiana. De Boré supplied land and capital. Morin supplied crucial technical knowledge, and enslaved workers supplied the labor that made plantation production possible. The breakthrough, therefore, was not just botanical. Louisiana already had cane. It was organizational. A crop, a mill, skilled sugar making, money, coerced labor, and access to trade were finally being assembled in one place. Notice what changed here. Cane did not suddenly become sweeter than maple. It became investable. A sugar plantation could put hundreds of acres under one crop, and a mill could process harvests from those acres. Expensive equipment made sense when enough cane passed through it. Merchants and lenders could finance the operation because the product moved through established markets, and the labor could be concentrated too. That last point was decisive. Sugarcane had to be cut and processed quickly. Mills and boiling houses ran under enormous seasonal pressure. Plantation owners solved that labor problem through slavery. By the early 19th century, Louisiana sugar was becoming a system in which land, machinery, finance, and enslaved labor reinforced one another. This is the central difference. Maple sugar could be produced without a plantation. Cane sugar became powerful because it could be produced through one. Maple lost the market. Plantation cane won the system. Now imagine the two landscapes, not as a moral cartoon, as two production systems. In the north, maple trees stood across farms and woodlots. The sugar season came once a year. Sap had to be gathered from tree after tree. The raw material was mostly water. Fuel had to be burned simply to remove that water. Roads could be poor. Production varied with weather. And as settlers cleared forests for fields, some maple resources disappeared with the trees. Maple's strengths were also its limits. It was distributed. It worked at household scale. It used a seasonal lull in farm labor. It required relatively little capital. Those were exactly the qualities abolitionists admired. But national commodity markets reward a different set of traits: volume, concentration, standardization, finance, transport, and predictable supply. Plantation cane moved in that direction rapidly. A planter could expand acreage. A mill could grow larger. A merchant could move sugar down the Mississippi and through New Orleans. Profits could purchase more land, more equipment, and, before emancipation, more enslaved people. The federal government did not pass a law banning maple sugar. There was no national order telling Americans to abandon their trees. Policy worked more indirectly. The tariff of 1816 placed a duty of 3 cents per pound on imported brown sugar. That gave domestic sugar producers some protection from foreign competition. In theory, maple could benefit too. But protection is most valuable to a system capable of expanding behind it. Louisiana cane had plantations, mills, commercial credit, river transportation, and a growing national market. Maple still had winter woods, family labor, kettles, and thousands of separate decisions. If you were building a national sugar business, which system was easier to enlarge? That is why this is not really a story about one plant defeating another. It is about the kind of agriculture a market can see, finance, measure, and multiply. There is a danger in telling this story only through production numbers. Those numbers can make the rise of cane sound like a simple triumph of efficiency. For enslaved people on sugar plantations, it was something else. Sugar cultivation and processing demanded exhausting labor. Cane had to be planted, cut, hauled, crushed, boiled, and converted into sugar on a strict schedule. The plantation's efficiency came partly from the ability of owners to command labor by force. The surviving landscape of Louisiana still records that system. At Magnolia Plantation, enslaved Africans were brought into a colonial economy that included sugarcane. At later Louisiana sugar properties, dozens, and sometimes around 100, enslaved people worked to produce the crop and the wealth it created. So when we say cane became cheaper at scale, we have to ask a second question. Cheap for whom? The planter could calculate land, equipment, output, sale price. The human cost did not appear in the same column. This is where the old maple campaign becomes more interesting than a failed agricultural experiment. Rush and other abolitionists were trying to change consumption itself. They were telling buyers that sugar was not morally neutral. A sweetener carried the labor system that produced it. That idea feels surprisingly modern. Buy this product, they argued, and you support one system. Buy that one, and you support another. But moral purchasing ran into the same problem it often does today. Price and availability are powerful. Cane sugar became easier to move through national markets. It became familiar, it became standardized, and the plantation system generated enormous quantities. Maple remained real, useful, and substantial, but regional. The numbers from 1850 show just how wide the gap had become. The United States reported roughly 34 million pounds of maple sugar. Cane sugar, about 248 million pounds. More than 7 pounds of cane sugar for every pound of maple sugar. Maple had not disappeared. In fact, 34 million pounds is far too much to call maple a curiosity. Farm families were still tapping trees across the northern states. The old system remained productive because it fit those farms and those landscapes. But national dominance is not the same thing as survival. Once cane occupied the center of bulk sugar commerce, maple no longer needed to vanish for cane to win. It only needed to remain outside the mainstream, seasonal instead of continuous, regional instead of national, identifiable instead of anonymous. That difference still shapes the way we encounter the two products. One usually arrives simply as sugar, the other still announces where it came from. The national sugar economy had chosen its center of gravity. And here is the counterpoint. Maple romantics should not ignore. Even without slavery, maple faced genuine limits. The season is short, sap is dilute, weather changes the yield. Trees are spread across large landscapes. Transportation once was difficult. Commercial experiments in the 1790s disappointed investors. Cane did not win only because plantation owners were cruel or politicians favored them. Cane also fit large-scale commodity production exceptionally well. That distinction matters. The argument is not that America possessed a perfect maple sugar economy and deliberately destroyed it. The argument is that Americans once saw maple as a serious alternative, and even as a way to separate sweetness from plantation slavery. Then, the market rewarded the system that could concentrate more land, capital, processing, transportation, and controlled labor. Maple survived by becoming something different. Today, it is not the anonymous white sweetness in almost every kitchen. It has a place: Vermont, New York, Wisconsin, Michigan. A sugar house in late winter, steam under a roof, a bottle with a landscape attached to it. And perhaps that is why maple syrup feels special now. We turned one form of sugar into a commodity so ordinary that we barely think about where it came from. The other kept its name. So the next time maple syrup runs across a pancake, do not see only syrup. See the surviving edge of a much larger American experiment. A time when people looked at a forest and imagined that ordinary sugar might come from trees. Maple lost the market. Plantation cane won the system. Was cane sugar's victory mainly better economics, or did plantation labor and the system built around it decide the outcome? Tell us where you come down in the comments. Subscribe to Forgotten Crop for more food history buried beneath our feet.